I gotta ask.
Welcome to a special program on Leap Alive this evening. A little rarity for us to be coming to you live on a Wednesday evening, but we have special guest in the studio this evening that has some what he considers extremely important news that he's worked a lifetime on, discoveries, and he wants to bring this to you tonight. Welcome to the studio. How's it going, sir?
Thank you, Johnny.
Could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is John Saxer, but I have a Swiss name too. My Swiss name is Johann Christian von Hohensax von Sax II. And my shorter version of that is Johann von Sax. I was born Prince of Switzerland. My father died a few years ago, and now I'm King of Switzerland. The Swiss people don't recognize me as king, but that's okay. My bloodline goes all the way to Isaac, and my last name von Sax means from Isaac. So, what I want to do tonight, and the name of our show tonight is Unmasking the Gods. And the subtitle is, All the Ancient Gods Were Aliens.
All the ancient gods were aliens.
That's right, Johnny. Johnny's my producer here at Leap Alive, and I'm so happy Leap Alive gave me the opportunity to share this information with you. I started archaeology when I was 18 years old, and now I'm 68 years old. So that's a total of 50 years I've had in archaeology. I'm an amateur archaeologist, but I'm also a psychic archaeologist. And a gentleman named Jeff Goodman wrote a book called Psychic Archaeology, and I read it in 1970. And I said, that sounds like a great thing to be as a psychic archaeologist. But I didn't stop at reading the book. I traveled from Wisconsin to Arizona, Tucson, Arizona, I believe it was, and I had a discussion, a talk all afternoon with Jeff Goodman. And the end of the conversation was, well, just go out and see what you can find. You're a psychic archaeologist now. He sort of ordained me with his book and his conversation that day. So there's a lot of archaeologists that are Christian or biblical archaeologists, and what they do is they go out to prove the Bible is correct. They're starting from, they have an agenda. They're starting from the point of view that they want to prove the Bible is correct. Where I wanted to go forward with the idea that let the archaeology show me the correct truth, rather than to have the preconceived notion of what the truth might be. So that's the only change I had from Christian or biblical archaeologist. I'm a Catholic. I read the Bible a number of times, and I use the Bible as one of my sources for information. But tonight, what I plan to do is pull a rug out from under all the major religions. Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Now, it's quite a chore to pull out the rug from underneath these religions, and I don't do it in a negative way. What I'd like to do is pull it out, the rug out from under these religions in a positive way, so that we are not deceived by ancient astronauts who have come to the earth. When I was 15 years old, I went to Europe with my mother, and I toured all through Europe. I spent a week in Switzerland, and there was a foggy system going on in Switzerland. And we were bound to the hotel a few nights, and I met an interesting character called Erich von Däniken. And I'd read a couple books on ancient astronauts before I ever met Erich von Däniken, and we talked for 2 nights in a row all about ancient astronauts and what they would be like if they came here, and possibly they had come here. And that we were all upbreeds or hybrids of these aliens in one way or another. So, back in ancient Egypt, I was an Egyptologist before I came down to Tarpon Springs 27 or 8 years ago. And I was an Egyptologist for 13 years. And one of the things I learned about Egyptology is that many of the Egypt gods were their pharaohs until they finally had children, and then their children became the pharaohs. So right there in Egyptology, they tell you that the gods were the pharaohs. And there's a difference between an incarnated God and an almighty God. An incarnated God, such as Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, Avalokiteshvara, all these beings are like regular human beings. They have a lifespan. They have blood running through their veins. They can even be killed in an occasion where there's a war between the gods. Anyway, those gods produced pharaohs, and then the pharaohs produced a line that runs through Israel, and then that line that runs through Israel runs into Europe as the Merovingians, and then the line runs up into Switzerland as the von Saxons. So my lineage goes all the way back to the Egyptian pharaohs. I have about 2 briefcases full of the information that goes father to son all the way back. You couldn't find me if you went forward from the Egyptians, but if you go back from my point of existence back to the ancient Egyptians, you can find a hardcore line of father to son. So, with that in mind, I have 50 years of archaeology, and I'm descended from the ancient Egyptian gods. I'm the equivalent of a pharaoh. I have a Merovingian symbol on my hat. That has to do with the Merovingians of the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th centuries. Those Merovingians were said to have connected with the children of Jesus, and they produced a line of kings that ran Europe in the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th century. They were killing off those Merovingian kings, though, just general humanity. And one of the young princes, Prince Ursa, escaped assassination, and he went up into Switzerland, and he started the line of von Sax in Switzerland. So that's how I come into being. My father was a Swiss prince, and my mother was a Welsh princess. They just happened to meet, and they produced children. My mother's last name was Davis. My father's name was von Sax. So we have the line of Isaac intermixing with the line of David. So that was a special breeding, and that's why I became an archaeologist, just to try to find out truth, the truth of who we are and where we come from. And also with that truth, I've been trying to find out who's corrupting mankind and how are they doing it. How come things seem to go wrong? Our politicians make bargains with tyrants and evil people throughout the world. I wondered why our country was doing that kind of thing. After the death of John Kennedy, I was 12 years old, and that alerted me to the fact that we had trouble here on Earth. A good man like Kennedy was killed, and I thought his reign of president would go on, and when he was assassinated, I realized something was very wrong in America.
Now let me just go right there. Now, with the assassination of JFK, and at that time in your life, what would have led you to believe anything when you're saying something was wrong to lead you into aliens and gods? That's what I want to know.
Well, the way I figured out something was wrong is I could just sense Lyndon Baines Johnson was a no good man. He came on so wrong compared to John Kennedy. How that would lead me into the gods. My father had a sporting goods chain of sporting goods stores. I went to the university, wanted to be an accountant and someone who could run a chain of sporting goods stores. But as it was in the University of Wisconsin, there was a lot of use of the marijuana, and I found myself taking marijuana. And then I eventually graduated to a little bit of LSD. And the last LSD trip I took was just basically too much. I had a vision of God that didn't end for 2 weeks. So,
Now, you know, when you say that, right away you're going to get the skeptics to say that potentially you lost your marbles when you took the LSD then. You never came out of your trip.
well, it's true that I can look and see God again if I wish to see God. And so I never really did come out of my trip, as it was, but it was that I was seeing through solidified matter to see God creating a universe in a holoographic way. And so what we perceived as hardcore material matter was being created by the mind of God. So I had an education that you might get if you were a Buddhist monk sitting in a cave for 20 years and meditating on the universe. I would have to say that the LSD opened my pineal gland, and I didn't need 20 years. I needed about 3 hours before my pineal gland was open. So I could start to see the difference between a real God and gods that were pretending to be gods. And so those gods were setting up their kingdoms here on earth as king and god. So the first kingdoms that we had on earth were based on a god-driven kingdom. But those weren't actually gods, those ancient aliens that had built the pyramids. Those beings were actually aliens seducing the public into believing they were gods through the use of their high technological items. They had what we have now. They had TV cameras, airplanes, radio, lots of magical things to the people back then that they had so much technology, and the people back then had no technology, so they were easily duped into believing that the Egyptian pharaohs were gods. But they were actually ancient aliens that came here using their spaceships to build those pyramids and other monuments around the world.
Okay, so what you're saying is the theories that have been there for a long time with the pyramids, which are said to be exactly symmetrical, you're now saying through your research that those were in fact aliens that built them.
That's correct. Now, one of the points I was going to get into, that I'll get into right now since the question's been raised, is who built the pyramids? Well, I'm saying the gods built the pyramids. Now, if you look at a great pyramid, you'll see that in the center of the Great Pyramid there's something called the King's Chamber, and in the center of the King's Chamber, off to the side slightly, there's something called the King's Coffer. They've just named it the King's Coffer. It's like a box made out of stone, granite stone box, and it has a little chunk carved out of the corner, and it's 27 1/4 inch wide, and it's about 42 inches long in the center of this coffer. Now, there's an item that we all know about in Judaism, which we call the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the Jews talk to God through the Ark of the Covenant. They believe that inside the Ark of the Covenant is a living God. And if you'll remember your biblical history, I have a Bible in front of me, that Moses was raised as a prince of Egypt. His mother was a princess who saved him out of the bulrushes in a basket that he was saved in, and they made him a prince. So Moses knew all about the interior of the Great Pyramid and how to run it, because the Pharaoh was still working the pyramid back then. And at one point, he must have seen in the very center of the Great Pyramid, and the word pyramid means fire in the middle, in the very middle of the Great Pyramid is the King's Coffer. and the king's coffer is empty. So what used to fit in the king's coffer, because I feel that the Great Pyramid with a quartz crystal on top is an amplifying device for the gods to talk to their home planet, because this is a far outpost base for them here on Earth, so they want to talk back and forth to the planet that spawned them and brought them here. So they needed an amplifier, and they used the Great Pyramid as an amplifier. But what's missing out of the very center of the Great Pyramid? The Ark of the Covenant is approximately 27 inches wide and about 35 inches long. And if you were to take that Ark of the Covenant, if somebody had the Ark of the Covenant, they could slip it right into the king's coffer, and they would have 1/8 of an inch to spare on each side of the width of the Ark of the Covenant as it enters that box. So I maintain that since Moses was a prince, and a prince would be also a priest of the Egyptians, he had access to that box that was inside the Great Pyramid. And if we remember the Jewish Bible and what they did with the Ark of the Covenant, they would tie a rope onto the head high priest's leg, and if he went into the Ark of the Covenant, if he was killed talking to God, because the box was a talking box, then he could be pulled out of there. So that Ark of the Covenant had some amazing properties. It could kill at will, and it could talk. And they felt that it was the seat of God on earth. And kind of it was, in a way, the seat of an ancient alien god, the head of a mission to Earth that had stayed back on his home planet and would talk to his divine pharaohs, or his godlike pharaohs that had first come to the Earth, that were actually spacemen. So as they died out, the information on who they were talking to died out, and so the sons of the pharaohs ended up with a pyramid that was working and a box that they could talk to their god inside the Great Pyramid in the king's coffer. So this is why I believe that the Great Pyramid was a communication device between God, the god of the earth, which was a pharaoh, and the god in outer space that was the head god of the mission here to earth. And they would report back to him using the pyramid. So these are not actually gods, but just like we would talk to somebody who went to the moon, they'd have a radio to talk back to us. Well, if there's a bunch of moon men up there and they saw the landing rover, the landing craft and the rover, they might think that we're highly technical advanced, and if we're talking back and forth and they didn't know what a radio was, they would think we were talking to some god back and forth. So it's a matter of our technology has reached to a point that we're not as deceived as we used to be by the aliens that have called themselves gods. In ancient Egypt, you have Osiris, Isis, and Anubis, and a variety of other gods with animal heads. In Persia, you have the gods of Persia, and Greek, you have the Greek gods. But what are we really dealing with? We're dealing with other planets who have come to the earth. They may not be the actual same groups of gods, but they're all projecting themselves as gods on earth because they have such high technology. And the one god that has guided me throughout the last, 45 years is the god Poseidon of Greek mythology. Now, I had a waterbed store called Neptune's Bedside Manor, and then I had another waterbed store called the Lost Bedroom of Atlantis, and that was back in 1978 to 83. I had those two stores. And then I eventually left Tarpon Springs, and a friend of mine was starting a bike store called Neptune Cyclery. So I decided to join him on the basis of the word Neptune, because that was the Roman word for the god Poseidon. And I just kept on with that same god, and I found that that god was pretty amazing. So my archaeology, even though I didn't plan to vindicate the alien god that was Poseidon, I plan to do it here tonight. So if we can actually put up our first picture, that we would have the...
What picture would you like?
That was a picture of Poseidon with the horses.
Poseidon with horses. Let me scroll through that.
Yeah, and then while he's getting that ready, I'll start talking about Poseidon. We have vases that archaeologists have found, and they have a picture of mermaids who are in the water actually fighting the Greeks. And the Greeks are in boat, and they're stabbing each other. The mermaids are stabbing up at the Greeks, and the Greeks are stabbing down at the... Actually, they weren't mermaids, they were mermen. So, what I maintain is that Poseidon, the Greek god of the sea, horses, animals, big and large, and fish, was actually a giant merman. Because sometimes we see him depicted with a fish tail or a serpent tail. And so we have a picture there of two horses with serpent tails. And in this particular picture, Poseidon is shown with legs, and he has his trident on. But as we go along, I have some more pictures of Poseidon. And what I'm going to try to do is teach you about the two Gardens of Eden. There's a Judeo-Christian biblical Garden of Eden that's between the Tigris and Euphrates River in Iraq. Or is it Iran? One of those places. Here's a nice picture of Poseidon with his tail. And you see how he's a giant there. That's a ship he's dealing with. And I think he might have some man in his hand. And there's a bunch of ships behind him. And he'll have no problem at all with all those ships, because there's about an 80-foot high merman. Now on his planet of water, he probably ruled. They got together a space mission, and they came down to Earth. They splashed down at a place called Lake Tarpon in Tarpon Springs, Florida. And as their spaceship filled with water crashed, the first thing Poseidon did was he built an underground river, and he connected to spring water that underground river, and it surfaced in the heart of what is now called Tarpon Springs, Florida, at Spring Bayou. So, if we can find a picture of the whole city, we can throw that up. That one that's up there right now happens to be a picture of the serpent head, but we'll try to find the whole picture of Tarpon Springs, and we'll go from there. So what he did was he built an underground river, and in Greek non-mythology, they call that underground river Alpheus. And the word Alpheus, alphabet, means first letter or the first river. So, in Tarpon Springs, we have a key point for finding the Garden of Hesperides. And this is a picture of Tarpon Springs turned upside down, where south is on top and north is at the bottom. The reason why we've had to turn the picture upside down is because a planet passing over the Earth, magnetics or gravity grabbed our North Pole, which was the South Pole at the time, and flipped it down to the opposite pole, and then the South Pole came up to the North Pole. So in order to see this picture correctly, we had to turn it upside down. The top figure in that picture of the carved out river of Tarpon Springs, and this is right in Tarpon Springs, which used to be the Garden of the Three Hesperides. So we have a picture of Poseidon officiating a wedding ceremony between his son. So let's see if I can get this right. This is Poseidon up here where I'm pointing to, and his son is down here where my finger's going, and that is Atlas, and he's marrying Hesperus, who is the female in this picture. So we have God, Adam, and Eve, and he's saying, love one another, be fruitful, and multiply. And then off of Atlas's back, we have a river dragon called Ladon, and that river dragon extends to behind my head here, if you want to cut me out of the picture, producer Johnny. So then we have the river dragon down behind Atlas. So we have four figures there. We have a figure, a godlike figure called Poseidon. We have Atlas, the first man in Greek mythology, non-mythology to me. And we have his wife, Hesperus, and we have the river dragon. So we have God the Father, Adam, Eve, and the serpent, all in one picture. Well, that's the Greek story. But to me, the Greek story is more correct than the Judeo-Christian Bible, because we have all sorts of vases and pictures and depictions of the Garden of Eden, and we have those depictions. We can run some of those depictions in the background of the Garden of Eden, where the serpent is climbing the tree of life. And the tree of life, I believe there was just one tree in the Garden of Hesperides, or the Garden of Eden, that was particular. It was a tree of life, and the tree of life contained the knowledge of good and evil. Because if you had the knowledge, you could live for a whole long time. So if you eat of the fruit of the tree of life, you will surely live a long time, because the tree of life was designed by Poseidon to get rid of the bacteria, the fungus, and the viruses of the body. So here in this picture we have a serpent climbing the tree of life. He has a face of a human, and he can obviously talk to Adam and Eve. This is a picture from the Garden of Eden, the Judeo-Christian Bible version, and yet they depict this as a talking serpent spiraling up the tree of life. And if we can just go through some of these pictures quick of the tree of life and the serpents. This is another one where we have Adam and Eve behind me. Oh no, this is the one where Hercules is killing the dragon. That dragon depicted in the Garden of Eden is depicted as a dragon. But many Greek vases depict that dragon, whose name is Ladon, with a spiraling up the tree of life. Some of the depictions he has one head, other depictions he has 100 heads. My take on that would be simply that he might have had 100 little serpents in the same tree as he was in, but he certainly wasn't a serpent with 100 heads. He was maybe the main serpent, which was called Ladon. And in Greek mythology, here's a picture of Adam and Eve. This is the Garden of Eden picture. And you see that the serpentine tail of the devil in that picture is portraying this devil had a fish tail or a serpent tail, and yet he had the upper body of a man. Now earlier when we were looking at Poseidon, he had the upper body of a man, but he had a fish tail. So what I maintain has occurred here is they were using the genetics of their upper body, and they found a creature on Earth that they could use for walking about, to splice in the genetics of legs onto the genetics of the upper body. These people, if they travel from one star to another, already have genetics figured out, and they know how to work genetics. In fact, right here in Tarpon Springs, one of the things I found was a quartz crystal magnifying glass, but it was more of a microscope because it really gave a big picture. So if you happen to be from another planet and you wanted to do some gene cutting, it sure would be handy to have a microscope. And we found that in one of the Indian mounds here in Tarpon Springs. By we, I mean archaeologists. The archaeologist that found that was Frank Cushing in 1896. He didn't know what it was, he just knew it wasn't an Indian relic. So, anyway, he also said that there was an ancient rock quarry in Bailey's Bluff, which is north of Tarpon Springs, that is 6,500 years old. He may have been wrong on the age of the quarry, but he was correct that it was ancient. So what were they building over in Bailey's Bluff? They were carving out ancient stone anchors. And why would they do that? Well, they came from another planet. They didn't bring everything from the other planet here. So if they wanted to build ships that rode on the oceans, on the water, they would have to build ships. And one thing ships needed were anchors. They didn't need sails back then because they built huge ships, but they still needed anchors. Here's a typical example of an anchor. I always think that looks like an owl's eye. This is in Newport Richey, which was Old Port Atlantis. And I saw this stone anchor about 6 years before I realized that it was a stone anchor. Yet I kept wondering, why are people putting 17.5-inch holes in these stones? First of all, it'd take a lot of work. Second of all, what good are they? And then one day I realized that these stones with these holes in them were actually used for the ropes that they tied to their giant ships. So I started going up and down the coast of Florida, and I was examining this one. Stay on this one for a second. This one, if we cut me out of the picture, you'll see that it has a bunch of marks in the stone. Those are rope marks. Not every single stone had a hole in it that was used as an anchor. This one, I believe, you can see those grooves in there, and those would represent the rope lines. After years and years of work as a stone anchor, they would etch their rope lines into the stone. So that's why I took that picture. This one shows, this is a rock up at Newport Richey. This shows the face of Atlas's wife, and her name was Hesperus, and wasn't she beautiful? This is a primitive human, but yet you can see the human face. You can see the eyes, the nose, the mouth, and the chin. And I'm sure she was incredibly beautiful to Atlas. This is Atlas's face in that same stone anchor in front of Johnny Leverock's on 19 in the middle of Newport Richey, which is Old Port Atlantis. And this is right at the entrance port to a marina in Newport Richey. And you can just barely see the starfish crown on top of Atlas's head there. You can see a couple of the points. And Poseidon used to wear a starfish crown. So I've identified this figure as Poseidon's son Atlas. Here's a picture of me in a magazine next to a nice rock that I found. This one had 3 holes. I used to think, well, if you had 2 holes and your anchor was stuck in the mud, you would rock it back and forth. This one had 3 holes, so I'm not quite sure why they needed the extra hole there. But with just 2 holes, you could rock the anchor loose. So most of the anchors. This is a map of, well, if we go to this map, you can see that Tarpon Springs is laid out and around these 4 figures of Eden, these 4 carved figures. So in Greek mythology, when they talked about Atlantis and Poseidon, who ruled Atlantis, they talked about this carved out garden. And they said that it was no problem for Atlantis, no problem for Poseidon to carve out the river system. After all, he was a god. So they identified Poseidon as a god, but what they really could have said, well, after all, he was 80 feet tall, and if he wanted to dig out a river, he could certainly dig out a river because he was 80 feet tall. So that's the way I view it, because Poseidon's best friend was named Hespero, and in Greek mythology, Hespero was identified as a spaceman. So I'm thinking birds of a feather are flocking together in this situation, and Poseidon was a spaceman too. Why would he have a best friend named Hespero who's a spaceman? And Hespero married Atlas's Hesperos' daughter, Hesperus, married Atlas, who is Poseidon's son. So Atlas and Hespero had 3 daughters called the 3 Hesperides, and so that's what's called the Garden of the 3 Hesperides, carved out for Atlas and Hesperus and the 3 daughters of them. And so if you take those 3 names, Hespero, Hesperus, Hesperides, you finally get the word, dropping the Hes, you get Paradise or paradise. So the word paradise comes from ancient Greek non-mythology in identifying the location of paradise, because paradise is the garden of the 3 Hesperides. And that's where we get our biblical story of God carving out a garden in a river system for Adam and Eve. Apparently, that was a Greek true story that for whatever reason, whoever wrote Genesis in the Bible had their own agenda. Because in the Greek story, the river dragon called Ladon was the guardian of Eden and protected the 3 Hesperides. And in the Jewish Torah Garden of Eden in Genesis, the serpent was a tempter and not necessarily a good figure in the Garden of Eden. But what I have to point out about the 2 creatures, and I've read many, many books, in the ancient lost books of Eden, you have Adam and Eve walking around the Garden of Eden, and the problem that they're having is they can't separate which God is which. They can't separate the devil from God because they look so identical. And so when you go to Greek mythology, Zeus and Poseidon look identical, except for, in Poseidon's case, he has a fish tail, and in Zeus' case, he has human-type legs. So what the gods have done is they've come to the earth and they've spawned children. And their offspring are basically hybrids. And every time the gods come to earth, they're taking what exists here and upgrading it. So we have improvements in mankind throughout the ages as these gods have tried to improve mankind. In the ancient Sumerian tablets, the first men that they created in their tablets were the black-headed race. And they wanted to create that race in the Sumerian tablets so that these creatures that they created could help them in the gold mines. And Zacharias Sitchin, somebody I met through the Ancient Astronaut Society that Eric von Daniken started, he was able to read the Sumerian tablets, and he read the story of Gilgamesh, and that matched up with the story of Noah. And so we see stories that have matched up that are more ancient than the Bible that are included in the Bible. So as normal Jews, Christians, or Muslims, we're believing a book that is far removed from the original text. And that book is written with an agenda. I have not figured out what the agenda is, because I haven't figured out why they changed the role of the river dragon Ladon as a guardian of Eden, or a guardian of paradise, to the new role of the dragon serpent devil that's in the garden of the Judeo-Christian Bible. I don't believe there's 2 rivers carved out by 2 different gods. I believe there's only one river on earth carved out by one so-called god, Poseidon, and that river's been found in Tarpon Springs, Florida. And I can identify the parts of the river, but we've had a brief show of those parts, so I don't think we need to get into that. Well, this would be Poseidon, as pictured. There's his right hand, his left hand, and as you see it on your screen, the right side shows, actually it's the left side showing Spring Bayou, and the spring is where his underground river came to the surface from 120 feet down. Incidentally, every year, January 6th, the Greeks have a Epiphany ceremony. The Epiphany ceremony celebrates John the Baptist when he baptizes Jesus Christ. So all the boys dive into that spring, and I believe that's the spring of rejuvenating life as talked about in Greek mythology. So it seems to me that the Greeks, just like salmon, have come to their spawning ground from Greece and started a settlement in Tarpon Springs and carried on their traditions here in Tarpon Springs right back to where they began. Because I believe the Atlanteans and the Greeks are cousins. And the war between the Atlanteans and the Greeks happened a couple thousand years after they split up. So the Greeks and the Atlanteans didn't even realize they were cousins when they were having wars in very ancient times. This would be about 3000 BC, and they would have split up about 5000 BC, or even before that. If you want to put up another picture, Johnny, of that same picture you just had there, then we can get that one and talk about that for a moment. Then we have the two lovers in Eden, Adam and Eve. On the left you see Adam, where it says Tarpon Bayou there, you see his one of his arms reaching down. It seems to be in between the legs of the figure on the right, and she would be Eve or Hesperus, and she has a ponytail, a breast, the back, the hips, the legs, the knees, and you can almost see her ankles there. You can almost see the bones in her legs, actually. And what Poseidon is telling these two is to love one another and to be fruitful and multiply. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're being fruitful and loving each other and about to multiply. And then we have another picture that's right behind Atlas there, right behind his seat there. And that was a picture we showed earlier of the river dragon's head, which was called Ladon. And so if we can pull up the picture of Ladon eventually, we'll be able to see his head, and we'll be able to kind of cross-reference with some biblical prophecy of the finding of Eden. There you go. It almost looks like the river dragon is smiling there, or at least he's got his mouth open. But there's a coin that's found in the river Jordan, and it shows a picture of Christ crushing the head of the serpent, and the serpent's head is identical to this picture. So how they ever minted a coin in the Jordan River that depicted something across the ocean is beyond me, but they did it. This is the exact picture of the head that the Christ figure is crushing. So in the Bible, in Genesis in the Bible, you have an enmity. And Christ is supposed to come back, bruise his heel, and crush the head of the serpent, and that's what I believe the coin is about. And we'll show a picture of the coin a little bit later. And if we can have the whole picture of the serpent climbing the tree of life, that would be a 90-degree turn of the general picture of Tarpon Springs. So if you can just imagine this picture turn 90 degrees where that squiggly part is down below, and the Poseidon, Atlas, and Hesperus are on top, what you have is the serpent climbing the tree of life, and you have Poseidon, Atlas, and Hesperus being the branches of the tree of life. So all the pictures of the Garden of Eden and all the pictures of the serpent, or the dragon I should say, Ladon, in Greek mythology, they're all depicting the same scene, which is the scene that you see carved out of the river in Tarpon Springs. The serpent is climbing the tree of life, and the branches are the branches of mankind and the tree of life. So it's a depiction of mankind. And so I'm not sure what the serpent represents in that picture. It could represent a hybriding of mankind where they cut off a tail genetically. But I'm not quite sure, you know. I mean, this is a hard subject to understand the whole truth. I wish I could have a spaceman here, shake him up a little bit and tell him, you know, to tell us what happened. But we don't have a spaceman, so we can only go on the archaeological evidence. But if we go on the archaeological evidence with an agenda, like we want to prove that the Bible's absolutely true, we're not going to get anywhere. But if we go saying, well, let's see what the archaeology is here on Earth, then we'll begin to know. Here's a beautiful example of a stone anchor. The upper part has been broke off. If the upper part was there, I imagine it would stand about 12 to 15 feet high and weigh over 3 tons. That's 6,000 pounds. Now, I know, and there's the back of it, I know nobody can lift a 6,000 pound anchor, and we can't get 10 weightlifters around this stone anchor and lift it. There's no way mankind can lift those stones. Those anchors aboard those ancient arks must have had giant humans up to 24 feet tall in order to even mount those anchors and to bring them in and to slide them off the boat. They were not maneuverable by people our size. So in ancient times, we have places like Baalbek in Syria. We have, or Baalbek's in Lebanon, but we have all these giant monoliths in South America where the stones are 10 to 15 tons, and there's one stone that's 100 tons. These aren't stones that men were lifting. The earth has a hidden story where mankind has forgotten it, and the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C., the Smithsonian Museum, have hidden every giant skeleton that has come along from any archaeologist. They don't want mankind to know that there were giants. In Greek mythology, they talk about the Titans. Well, if you had a 24-foot Titan and you had a bunch of them aboard an ark that was the size of an oil tanker, 3 or 4 of those Titans could lift those anchors if they were 24 feet tall. And there have actually been pictures of archaeologists that have found skulls and bones from 24-foot giants. As a matter of fact, they're found in mounds all around America and all around the world. These ancient mounds are where these giants died, and they'd bury them, and then if they had tribes around there, they'd bury the king on top of the mound that was built for the giant, and then so on and so forth, and the mound would get bigger and bigger, and the giant's body would be on the bottom. And in the trying to identify where the Garden of Eden is, on the Tigris and Euphrates River, there are no mounds. But in the Anclote River, there's many mounds that have been dug into, and there's even a mound that's still in its pristine condition that nobody's dug into. In that mound, there's some kind of a giant, whether it's the body of Ladon, who was killed by Hercules on his 11th trip to his 11th trial, or his labor, they called it, the labors of Hercules. He was asked to go get a golden apple, 3 golden apples from the Garden of Hesperides. He didn't know where the Garden of Hesperides was. It was so long lost, and he was over there in Greece. He finally found someone that he wrangled, and that person told him where the Garden of Hesperides was. He got over to the Garden of Hesperides with his sword and his shield, and he took one look at the dragon and said, not going to fight him with the sword and the shield here today. Got to find something else. So he designed a bow and arrows, and he killed the dragon with an arrow. And the 3 Hesperides were crying and inconsolable for weeks. Hercules had just killed the dragon, stole 3 of the golden apples, and brought them back to some king in Greece as his 11th labor, and didn't realize what kind of trouble he caused. Well, when Poseidon got back there, he found the dragon dead and the girls inconsolable, and the only way he could console him was he made a new constellation That constellation is called Ophiuchus, and he threw the dead dragon, up into the sky, into the star system, and made him a constellation. And so he honored that dragon by making him a constellation. And so now we have the 13th constellation, called Ophiuchus. Now
the question here for you,
Yeah,
I'm sure
give me a
everybody's
question.
asking the question.
Yep.
Well, you're claiming the Garden of Eden in Tarpon Springs.
The
How
original
in the
source.
World, how in the world has everybody gotten it so far off and so wrong all this time?
It's a great question, and I managed to figure it out. It takes a lot to figure these things out. First of all, I had to find 2,000 stone anchors along the west coast of Florida.
Okay, hang on. Let me stop you right there because you're saying stone anchors.
Yeah.
What about some of the anchors, archaeologists, from other places of the world?
Well, this one's on Mount Ararat. This is an anchor from Noah's Ark, which matches up not only with the stone itself, made of limestone, but it matches up with, there's Ron Wyatt, who found these stone anchors. They have, Knights Templars have their crosses carved, about 7 crosses carved on the stone anchor, representing the 7 people that were on the ark. And so one of these pictures is what keyed me into these stone anchors in Tarpon Springs were actually stone anchors. But by finding 2,000 of them from Tallahassee to Naples, I began to realize that there was an ancient shipwreck or fleet wreck. The fleet of Atlantis had sunk along the west coast of Florida. Because I didn't have to do any digging as a psychic archaeologist. I just merely went to where the answer was as a psychic archaeologist, looked around. It may have taken me 7 years to figure it out. I got here in 1991. By 1997 or 8, I had it figured out. The Tarpon Springs was the Garden of Eden, and the west coast of Florida was the shipping ports of Atlantis, where they built the ships and they sailed them down to Newport Richey or Old Port Atlantis, where they loaded the ships up and the ships went out to sea.
How did they have it on the other side of the world all these times?
So what I'm getting to is that point. So all these ships are on the sea. If we have 400 in base, we have about twice that many at sea, about 800 to 1,000 ships at sea delivering their goods all over the world. And then we have about 400 that are at port all around the world. So the 400 ships that are at port at Tarpon Springs and along the west coast of Florida, and the 400 that are unloading their goods in different parts of the world are all subjected to a world flood. The only ships that weren't subjected to a world flood were the ships that were on the deep ocean. So there was about 800 to 1,000 of those ships from Atlantis, and that was called Poseidon's Navy. He had the first navy, and they were at sea. And all of a sudden, a planet called Nibiru, that's attached to our solar system, and a dark star that's attached to our sun called Nibiru, 65 billion miles away from the center of our sun, is a dark star called Nemesis. And Nemesis and the sun allow a giant oval orbit of the planet Nibiru. And so when Nibiru passes over our planet, it's 4 times the size of the Earth, and it has, I believe, 4 or 5 moons. And when it passes over our planet, it looks as big or even bigger than the moon. And the gravity attaches to our gravity. The North Pole, or I should say the South Pole of that planet, the negative side of that planet, attaches to our positive pole. And it pulls the planet 180 degrees around to the opposite pole. So our South Pole becomes our North Pole, and the North Pole becomes our South Pole. And as this is happening, it happens in 36 hours, and in 18 hours the Earth is traveling at about 600 miles an hour in order to reach that goal of 36 hours. So Atlantis sunk in a day and a half, according to Plato, and that's all we have to go with. So if the Earth is flipping and it takes 36 hours to flip the full cycle, halfway through it's 18 hours. The oceans are stable where the Earth is traveling underneath the ocean. So the people who are on the high seas and are navigating using the stars, they don't realize that an Earth is flipping underneath their ocean that they're sitting on with their 1,000 ships. And so when Noah finally lands, let's take his ship for example. He lands on Mount Ararat. He's the first ship to land because he's landing on top of a mountain as the waters are receding after the poles have found their new position. So the water recedes off the continents, and he looks around. The dove comes back after 3 times, or actually the 3rd time it doesn't come back, so he figures there's enough dry land. We're going to let the animals out. But he's on top of a mountain, and his boat freezes, and that's the only ark that remains. The rest of the arks waited for all the seas to come back into their basins and the oceans to come into their basins, and then they went over to the shores. They unloaded their fish. They had a big pool inside each one of these arks. They unloaded their animals, their birds, the plants that they had, and the humans. And each of these places where each of these ancient arks unloaded, there's a stone circle. And the stone circle might be only a half circle because the back of the boat would land, and they would dismantle the boat, and they would have housing and stockades for the animals that they made out of each of the arks in each of the new positions that they landed. There's over 260 stories of 260 different crews aboard each one of these arks. So there's legends of the flood all over the world. The only difference is with each one of these legends, they have a different crew and different names for each of these crews. So that's where I get the idea that many of these boats survived the Great Flood. And if you happen to be Noah on top of a mountain after the flood, you're navigating by the stars. You think you're in Georgia, and you think the Garden of Hesperides is south about 300 miles. So he goes down from Mount Ararat, 300 miles. He finds the Tigris and Euphrates River, which he calls that because the first names of were the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in the Garden of Hesperides. So he renames them after the first rivers. And the name of Euphrates is a Greek name which means dragon-shaped river. Well, the Tigris or the Euphrates is not a dragon-shaped river. But as you saw earlier in the depiction, Poseidon carved out this river for Adam and Eve, and they did have a dragon-shaped river, including the dragon's head and the dragon's body. So obviously Euphrates was the Ancoat River in Tarpon Springs, and the reason why they got the Garden of Eden off by half a planet is because the Earth flipped halfway around, and so obviously they're going to find an error of a half a planet. So that's why everybody was looking for the Garden of Eden over there near Mount Ararat. And so, we're going through pictures of Eden, the carved out river. The river, that's the dragon-shaped river you can see from behind Atlas's seat there. You can see the dragon head and the swirling of the dragon in the river. And so that's the part of the dragon-shaped river we will be referring to. So does that answer your question, how they could get it wrong a half a planet away?
Because
they're navigating by the stars.
Essentially because you're saying this planet, which was what planet?
Nibiru's gravity attached itself to our poles.
Is that something that is going to happen again?
Unfortunately, I've read where the ancient gods have apologized to us over time, saying that we tried to wrangle up the dog star, And in Egyptian mythology, the dog star would be Anubis. And the planet they're talking about is Nibiru. So Anubis and Nibiru are the same word, it's just slightly distorted. But they said that they tried to wrangle Anubis and they were unsuccessful, and they apologized to us in the future, which is an ominous warning that Nibiru could affect our gravity again. And so this is the main point of the entire religions, of all the religions and all the prophecies. The main point is the day of judgment, the great day of the Lord, has to do with mankind so unaware of everything. They think God's going to come out of the clouds and judge mankind. I'm not quite sure what they all think. But what they're talking about is that Anubis will be coming through our planet's area in space every 3,600 years, according to Zacharias Sitchin, who had decoded the Sumerian tablets, and that's what it said, every 3,600 years. The last time it was here, we see that Moses wanted to leave Egypt, and Egypt had many plagues, and 3,600 years ago, Thera blew up. And Thera is Santorini in the Mediterranean. The winds blew towards Egypt and caused the, I forget what it is, 7 or 8 plagues of Egypt, where they had frogs and locusts and flies, and eventually they had the Passover, where the angel would pass over and put lamb's blood on the lintels of the Jewish families' houses, so that, the Jewish men would paint the blood on the lintel so that the angel knew not to take the life of the male, the boy that was living in there that was Jewish, but all the other males were killed according to that ancient miracle. And even the Dead Sea parted according to that whole story, and that has to do with the planet Nibiru and pulling on the tides and pulling the water away from the Red Sea, and eventually getting out of position to affect the tides, and then the Red Sea would close in again over the Egyptians that were traveling after Moses. Which brings me to the point that Pharaoh wanted Moses to leave Egypt real bad, but all of a sudden Pharaoh started charging after Moses after he told Moses he could take his people out of Egypt. Why did Pharaoh change his mind? The answer is real simple, folks. Moses, being a high priest of the temple, stole the Ark of the Covenant that was the communication box between Pharaoh and Pharaoh's God. Moses wanted the box to talk to God himself. So he took the box, went out into the desert, walked the Jews around the desert for 40 years, so they would eventually forget that they stole the box that was in the center of the Great Pyramid. We have problems with all these religions. The victors write the story, the losers get the bad side of the story, and we don't see Pharaoh's side of it at all. We just think the Pharaoh was a bad guy chasing after a bunch of slaves, but actually he wanted the box to go back into the pyramid so he could communicate with his God, where Moses wanted that same God to communicate with too. So the seed of God on earth was somehow inside the Ark of the Covenant, and they were so technologically unadvanced that they didn't realize that that was a box that converts the energy waves coming off the pyramid into vocalization, and they could communicate back and forth. So the way Moses was using the box was that the aliens had come back near the earth to view what happens to the earth when Nibiru comes very close to it. So the aliens were back here, and because the box was a communication device, and Moses was following a pillar of smoke during the daytime and a pillar of light at night, he was actually following one of the alien spaceships through the desert, and he was communicating back and forth with his God through the use of that box and that communication device between our God and our God, which was a spaceman aboard a spaceship, guiding Moses through the desert for 40 years. Then the adults all died off. The children thought the box was made by Moses in the desert. The only thing that has ever fit inside the king's coffer that we've ever found on earth is the Ark of the Covenant. So I believe that it's a pretty good case for saying that the Ark of the Covenant used to be in the Great Pyramid and was built by gods. There is another ark available on earth. It's called the Ark of Gabriel. And that ark is talked about in the Muslim religion. And it's supposedly hidden in a cave near Petra. Petra is a stone city built by the gods before mankind was created. And so Petra is the city of the gods. So we have another amateur archaeologist named Dan Gibson. And Dan Gibson has found much evidence that the first 100 years of Mas, their Qibla, their wall that faces Mecca, the first 15 mosques are all facing Petra. Dan Gibson makes a pretty good case that Muhammad was born in Petra and not in the city we now call Mecca. And for Muhammad to be able to talk to an angel, it would be a good place to talk to an angel at Petra, because that's probably where the angels reside when they felt like residing somewhere comfortable on the earth. They had built Petra. That was their home. So the gods that were spacemen would wander the earth, but when they wanted to go home, they would go to Petra. Then there was a civil war in the Muslim religion, and one of the adversaries in the civil war destroyed the Kaaba that was in front of Petra. And the Kaaba was originally built by Abraham and Ishmael, and they called it the House of God. And they had this big black stone that was a meteor that fell to the earth, and they had that stone inside the Kaaba. And so when the civil war broke out amongst the Muslims about 110 or 15 years after Muhammad had started the religion, one of the people, the head of the opposing army, came to Petra and they destroyed the Kaaba, the box-shaped structure that Abraham and Ishmael built, and they even destroyed the foundations. So they moved Mecca, or Becca they called it back then, they moved Becca to where Mecca is now and rebuilt the Kaaba at Mecca, and they brought the stone along with them. So now we have 1.9 billion Muslims believing that Muhammad was born in Mecca in the middle of the desert, when Dan Gibson, the amateur archaeologist and historian and researcher, has identified the original location of Muhammad's home as in Petra. So all these Muslims 5 times a day are facing Mecca. And the reason for that is Muhammad wanted them to face the forbidden gathering spot. And the forbidden gathering spot Muhammad was talking about was right in front of Petra. So by moving the mosque to what is now Mecca, by moving the Kaaba to Mecca, all the Muslims now turn and face Mecca, when the first 100 years they used to turn and pray towards Petra, because Muhammad said the angels built Petra, and he was correct on that. But in front of Petra there was a place called the Forbidden Gathering Place where no animals or humans could be killed. That was what he thought was the Garden of Eden, where the angels oversaw the designing of mankind, and where Lucifer rebelled in saying that he wouldn't worship mankind. So that's where Lucifer had his first argument with the hierarchy, in that they were very proud of the creature that we are and wanted these ancient alien gods, spacemen, to worship their new creation. and Lucifer rebelled, and there was a war in the heavens, and Lucifer was thrown down to the earth, they say. So what I'm maintaining is that Michael the archangel who fought Lucifer was none other than Melchizedek, who Abraham paid tithes to. That's 1/10 of his booty that he got from the, I believe it was a war that he fought, and he gave 1/10 of the supplies to Melchizedek. So what is Michael the archangel, an angel, eating lambs and all the stuff that Abraham brought to him at Salem? And they say that Melchizedek, see how great this being was. He had no mother, no father, no beginning, no end, like a son of the living God. So sometimes I'll ask Christians, how many Christs are in the Bible? And they go, well, it's just one, Jesus Christ. I go, well, I'm not so sure. Because it's obvious that Melchizedek had the same kind of hierarchy as Jesus did. After all, they quote it as saying that he was like a son of the living God. What they're probably saying is that this Melchizedek was an alien from another planet. His father was ruling the other planet, and he was a son of that living God who was ruling the other planet and had control over the outposts around the galaxy that his people had traveled to, and one of his people was this Melchizedek. Some people think he was Shem from Noah's Ark, but I don't believe that at all. I believe he was probably one of the gods of Atlantis who guided the ark to its resting spot, and eventually turned up at Salem. So Salem ended up being Jerusalem, and when Abraham was paying tithes to this Melchizedek, who means my king and righteous God, there was no mention that this king and righteous God was some kind of super big giant. They portrayed him as a 8 or 9 foot human. And so when you look back to Petra and Muhammad having a talk with an archangel named Gabriel, there's a high likelihood that that archangel that he was talking to was none other than Lucifer. And Lucifer's home he made at Petra. So when we have a story of Michael the archangel shooting down, throwing down Lucifer to the earth, and Lucifer having dominion over the earth, I see that as a war in space between two spaceships, where Lucifer's spaceship was put out of commission and crashed in the Saudi Arabian desert, where the Kaaba now stands over it in the heart of Mecca. This is a picture of Lucifer. You know, he doesn't have horns, he's a beautiful angel, and he could have fooled anybody in thinking he was Gabriel. In fact, Muhammad might have said, "Who are you, Gabriel?" because of how bright and pretty Lucifer was. So Lucifer had an agenda in teaching Muhammad. Muhammad had the scrolls that were in Petra in a cave. He found those scrolls. Those were the scrolls for the Jews and the Christians during the end days. They would come to Petra. It says Judea will flee to Petra at the end days, or the days of judgment, the end times. So those scrolls were stored away for future Jews and Christians that would flee to Petra. Muhammad found the scrolls, translated them, put a twist on them to promote the sons of Ishmael. But he quoted those scrolls so well that they match up with the revelations of John the Revelator and many revelations from Hindu philosophy. And they match up in such a way that when the end times comes, it talks about the stars falling from the sky. And I see that as another earth flip. And with the story of these ancient aliens who apologized to us for not wrangling or tying up the dog star Anubis, which is Nibiru, we see the same story being repeated again as Nibiru comes through our solar system every 3,600 years close to the Earth, And we see that the last time it came was the time of Moses leaving Egypt for Israel. That was 3,600 years ago. So give or take 10 or 20 years, that planet's going to come through our solar system again. Because the great day of judgment, the great day of the Lord, has to do with a planet flipping and the culling of mankind. There's nothing you can do short of finding a high place in one of the high mountains on Earth and building a bunker, or building an ark, or finding a submarine. I mean, if you're gonna fight a planet flipping, you got to make some preparations. And that's why all our governments all over the world have built deep down bunkers, because they want the elite to survive the flipping of the planet Earth. They know that this is going to happen. They don't know exactly when, but I got a hunch they might know exactly when, but they just won't tell anybody. They won't even tell me, and I'm the one that spotted the planet Nemesis. When I was at the Ancient Astronaut Society in 1978, I told the Jet Propulsion Laboratory speaker that was at that convention, his name was Jerry Nudgebauer. I was in the lobby with Jerry as some other speakers were speaking. I was a speaker there too. I was only 28. Jerry was about 56 years old. I said, Jerry, do you know that there's a dark star attached to our sun? Jerry looks at me, 56 years old, I'm 28 years old. He goes, no such animal. I go, well, Jerry, there has to be another star in our solar system that's attached to our sun because of the precession of the equinoxes, because our sun and the rest of our planets are taking a 25,680-year trip around some invisible object. It must be a dark star that we're traveling around, because it has to have gravity for our solar system to travel around every 26,500 and some years. And what that is called an eon, or the great year. So the Mayan calendar on December 21st, 2012 was marking the beginning of a new great year and the end of an old great year. It wasn't the end of the world, it was the end of the great year. However, this particular end of the great year does coincide with the passing over, or the Passover of the planet Nibiru. So the 7 years of tribulation, I've managed to figure out it's from December 21st, 2012 to December 21st, 2019. Those are 7 years of tribulation. And the world's been going through tribulation with terrorists, earthquakes, and floods and tsunamis. I feel that we're going through tribulation at this point, and more than likely we're going to start seeing this planet come through our solar system. We'll probably have our first glimpse on December 21st, 2019. Just a calculated prediction. I'm not 100% sure. I mean, I'm researching these facts as any other human would. It takes a lot of research. You almost have to have 10 lifetimes to figure this out. I've done the best I could in the 50 years I've had in archaeology. So I would suggest, if you're hearing this report and you have mountain property in the Rockies or Switzerland or the Himalayas, that you start building your fortification on top of those mountains on the west side of the mountains. Because the water, the last time the earth flipped, came from the east. No, excuse me, it came from the west. So you have to have your mountaintop bunker built on the east side of the mountain, so that if the earth flips as it did before, the waves will go right over your bunker. And you have the most chance of surviving, if I'm correct, and if this is the great day of the Lord coming up after tribulation. So I'm not saying the whole Bible, which I have here, is wrong. I'm just saying that Genesis has been corrected somehow. And then we go into the sons and daughters of Adam and Eve, and that's where it starts to mix in with people like Abraham, where from that point on, I can see where the Bible's correct, and it's a family, a lineage portrayed in the Bible that goes from Abraham through time, and what his expeditions and his efforts were as his ancestors progressed down through history. All right, Johnny, any other questions we have?
I mean, I'm sure we don't really have comments coming in, but I'm sure what some people are thinking is, as you've said in the title of Unmasking the Gods, you've referred to aliens.
With high technology.
With high technology. So I guess the question is that you obviously believe in aliens. Here and now, aliens as people think them to be. I mean, people see these pictures. They talk about Area 51. They see pictures of UFOs. People spotted lights. They see this, they see that. Go ahead.
I did see a UFO, flying saucer, but the flying saucer I saw was about 7 times the size of a football stadium, and came out from the sunset, right out of the sun. It was over Kansas City, and I was about 20 miles east of Kansas City on Highway 70, Interstate 70. And out of my rear view mirror, I saw the flying saucer over the city, and I couldn't figure out how a flying saucer could be that big coming out of the sun over the city of Kansas City. So I said to my 2 hitchhikers, I think I see a flying saucer. So I look again, and it had shifted position in the sky. It was about halfway from Kansas City to my point. It went 10 miles in like 2 seconds. And I said to my hitchhikers, I said, I know I see a flying saucer now. So I look again out, and it shifted positions again. It went another 10 miles till it was almost overhead, so I had to look out the window. I wasn't looking through my rearview mirror, and I said, I've got to pull over. So right on the highway, I steered the steering wheel over, and I had a van, and the 2 hitchhikers couldn't see a thing, and there were hundreds of cars on the interstate. And I pulled over, I stopped, I jumped out, I looked straight up, and I saw this gigantic flying saucer with the most beautiful underbelly I'd ever seen. It looked like, well, 100,000 Christmas tree lights all over the bottom, every color you could imagine. And then they psychically talked to me. They said, we're the Star of Bethlehem. We travel through time. We'll be there when you need us. And then they just zipped off to my right as I was looking at them faster than I could shift my eyes to which way they went. I knew they went to the right, but I couldn't see where they went. They were out of sight immediately.
So let's fast forward that to now, here and now.
I believe I saw a real flying saucer, and it wasn't technology that anybody on Earth could have. It was beyond our capability, and it was 1978. So even though we might have found a flying saucer at Roswell, I don't think we got to the point of having something that was 7, football stadiums big at that point. So I believe that I saw an alien spacecraft with telepathic abilities and time traveling abilities. So I was convinced by that. Everybody would be. What were we going to say about it, Johnny?
I want to fast forward to here and now. Your theories on aliens are gods, unmasking the gods, fast forwarding to here and now.
I expect that all the actual alien craft that we've seen in our skies, and people all over the planet have seen these craft. I believe that they've come here to watch mankind as the earth flips. So they're here to save as many of us as they can, but they can't save us all. There's 7.5 billion of us. So we'd be lucky if they save as many as a couple 100,000 of us. So I'm not quite sure why they're coming here, and I believe they're coming from many different planets because there's many different styles of spaceships. I don't believe it's like on Earth where you have all the different car manufacturers. I think that the technology is different in many of the UFOs that I've seen. I've looked on YouTube and I've seen 1,000 different pictures of UFOs at this point, and you can see that they're employing different kinds of technology. And also there's a catalog of about 110 different kinds of alien creatures. Some of them are human-like, and you couldn't tell them apart from a human, but others of them are pretty ugly and scary. But they all seem to get along together in the movies that we have that they manufacture on TV, like Close Encounters of the Third Kind and different movies of us meeting aliens. I believe that they're all based on a source of reality, and then they manufacture the movie sort of to prepare mankind. A lot of people think that we're alone in the universe, but it's a pretty big universe for us to be the only intelligent creatures in the universe. So I happen to believe that the odds are against us being the only intelligent creatures in the universe. And although God Almighty loves us, and I've seen God Almighty loving us, and plants and bees and birds and trees, and He loves everything He's created. I've seen that for 2 weeks in a row and can always look back and see it. So I believe He loves us all, but He's ruling the material world from the spiritual world. And what the Holy Ghost is in Christian theology would be the emanation of God emanating the world in all different directions. And so there's a pillar of light that God swirls on as He's emanating the whole world. So I've seen the Almighty, and He doesn't look at all like any alien I've seen in the catalog.
So we've had a comment come up, and it's a valid point. Comment reads, how do we know the government didn't pay or blackmail your guest to tell us this story as disinformation?
Since I was 18 years old, I knew that there was a trilateral commission in the Illuminati. And I knew from Kennedy getting assassination that they were involved with Kennedy's assassination. My father got John Kennedy elected in Wisconsin and beat Richard Nixon when Richard Nixon had the Republican state. My father, Mr. Koss, William Proxmire, and Pat Lucey, a governor, all worked together to get John Kennedy winning the state of Wisconsin. That was the key state. That was the domino that dropped all the other dominoes. The only time I ever saw my father cry in my whole life, and he was a Congressional Medal of Honor winner, went across the ocean 20 times in World War II, dodged a battery of cannons when he was at Omaha Beach on a Liberty ship, and sunk 2 submarines off the coast of Florida. Never saw the man cry until John Kennedy died. That was my cue that something's wrong on this planet. I'm not working for the Illuminati. I'm not working for the deep state. I'm working for mankind because I am of the line of Judah. I'm the king of Judah. I'm the king of Israel. I'm the king of Switzerland. I'm also the king of England. Other people think they're kings, but they have not the royal blood. My royal blood's pure. So I'm on TV, on the internet, trying to tell people the truth. I'm not working as a disinformation. You've been getting disinformation the whole time. All this archaeology that I found, and I've tried to put it in a brief photo essay of the different things that I found, they all say to me the things that I'm telling you here today. They say to me that the earth has flipped in the past. They say to me that Atlantis was North and South America. They say that the Garden of Eden was not the biblical one, but the ancient Greek non-mythological one, because all the evidence shows this stuff. There's nobody on the planet that has done the 50 years of archaeological research to bring the truth to you. I didn't make a penny in 50 years in archaeology. Not one penny. Nobody's paid me a penny. I work every day. I live and dwell amongst you. I work every day for 20 to 30 bucks to pay for my animals, myself, my mortgage, and my taxes. Some days I make 50, some days I make 100. Most of the time it's around 40 bucks a day. So I've seen God, and the only thing I can do is work for him. So the Judaic kings of Israel were not only kings of Israel, but they were also high priests of Israel. So the king served two functions. He was king of the people, and so that was his political stance, and he was high priest, and that was his spiritual stance. And so basically that's what I'm doing. I'm working to try to solve some of the political problems, but I'm also working from a spiritual angle. The spiritual angle for me comes first. I have to face God again, and I'm certainly not going to face him without trying to do something in the last 50 years since I was 19 years old. It's 49 years now since I was 19 years old when I faced God. I want to be able to be comfortable with my life, that I tried to help as many humans and animals as I could. I'm on the side of the animals too. I don't like the idea that we have chickens in chicken-sized chicken coops to raise the chickens, or pigs that can't turn around in their cages, or slaughtering of animals and not using all their food. It bothers me that mankind is so rude and so cruel, and if the world is judged and most of mankind is killed, well, we might very well deserve it, because we're not being kind to the universe that God has given us, the planet God's given us, the creatures that God's given us. Just about every month that goes by, we're losing 200 species of animals here on Earth. I think that's a bad sign. It means that if the planet were to flip, we might all deserve it. And the only ones that are going to survive are the people that listen to me, or the government that knows the planet's going to flip, and they'll survive because they're the elite with the money, and they're building their own shelters and bunkers underneath the ground. I guess that answers the question on whether or not I'm working for the Illuminati or not. But my symbol is the eye on top of the pyramid. So
that's your symbol?
Yes. So people might get a little confused as to
why. Why is that your symbol?
Because of the divine inspiration. I call myself the Kalki Avatar. The Kalki Avatar is the avatar of Vishnu. Vishnu sees all. You have the all-seeing eye on top of the pyramid. If I'm the avatar of Vishnu, the Hindu triune God, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, I'm the avatar of Vishnu, which is the preserver God. What I'm trying to do is get the earth people to shape up and be righteous, and to fight the unrighteous physically if necessary, to stand up against their unrighteous, to not use the police force and wait for them to come and get a terrorist, but to stand up yourself with your concealed weapons permit and shoot the terrorist as he starts his terror. We don't need a police force. We need the righteous, sovereign citizens of the United States of America to stand up to this terrorism. When Russ Feingold stood up against 99 senators and 150 congressmen and said that if we pass this Patriot Act, it's going to make cowards out of us all. Now we're all cowards. He was right. What a prophet. That man was mentored by my father, and of course I was too. So, my father was a righteous man. I want to pass it on, the righteousness, to the rest of mankind if I can, using the technology of the internet, by trying to tell them what we're facing. The governments won't tell you that the earth has flipped in the past, even though the magnetic records from the volcanoes showed that north used to be south and south used to be north. They don't put two and two together and say, well, the earth had to flip for this record to be shown in the volcanoes that went off before the earth flipped last time, because their magnetism points the opposite way. That can only mean a pole shift of 180 degrees. So, there's smart people in the government. They probably told the leadership and the elite in the government that that's what's happened. What I've had to do is figure out this whole story myself, based on the fact that the corrupt humans were running the earth after the assassination of Kennedy. I also have located Kennedy's assassination vehicle. And for those people that want to shock, John Kennedy's still in the trunk of that vehicle, and it's in the hands of the Ku Klux Klan. I call them the Cuckoo Klan. They don't like that. They are pretty cuckoo. They're neither Christian nor American. Lots of them have invaded our police forces and our sheriff's departments all over the country, as well as paramedics and fire departments. And so I would like to see a bill passed by our boy Gus Bilirakis that the police departments could weed out the Ku Klux Klan factions in our government, police forces, government officials, because, and Masonic order, the Masons, because those people are all working together to spread corruption. They're all selfish, greedy individuals.
Now, let me get to a certain point for you here. And I know that you experienced this. I know it for a fact. And you're saying essentially that you've been on this quest for 50 years?
Yeah, I was about 18 or 19 when I realized somebody better do something.
Okay, so through these years, I know that you've been challenged, and basically, simply put, people are saying that you're cuckoo.
Well, the Ku Klux Klan is white.
Well, aside from the Ku Klux Klan,
let me just get to this cuckoo
people
thing.
are saying that you have lost your marbles.
Well, they haven't done any investigation.
Well,
I mean, I have all the paperwork.
Hang on now. And another comment
Yeah.
comes on saying most common side effect of permanent LSD poisoning is delusions of grandeur.
Well, the producer here, Johnny, that's producing the show, he knows me.
I do.
I work every day. I don't pull rank on my boss. I just do the jobs he asks me to do. I think if I had Napoleonic tendencies, I wouldn't have any bosses above me. I have no delusions about my life. I know I'm going to live and die just like the rest of everybody watching this. So I know that's no delusion, that we're all going to die.
But you got to admit that you've been challenged by this several times. In fact,
lots of times.
In fact, prior to airing this show, knowing it was going to come, you had somebody report and say that they wanted a welfare check on you.
Yes.
And the police came to do a welfare check on you, saying that you were crazy.
They're actually doing a welfare check on me now. They want me to talk to a psychiatrist. I've told them, quite frankly, that I am their king. White deputy came to my house, and I let him know that I am Johann von Sachs. I'm the king of all the Anglo-Saxons. That's 1.2 billion of us on the planet.
Okay, speak up a little bit.
That's 1.2 billion Anglo-Saxons. My name is Johann von Sachs. What we're dealing with Anglo-Saxons, Anglo means east of Gaul, which would be Germany and Switzerland and Italy. East of Gaul, and it'd be half of France too, and Gaul. Saxons is sons of Isaac, and so the white race, I believe, is a hybrid race. I don't believe that Isaac was a son of Abraham. I believe that Isaac was a son of Melchizedek, the king of Salem, an alien who impregnated Abraham's wife Sarah. That's not biblical. That's not orthodox. But it's the only answer, that there was a hybriding taking place, and that's why Abraham took Isaac up to the mountain with a knife and wanted to stab Abraham as a sign of his loving for God, and some angel stopped him, and I'm pretty sure that same angel was Melchizedek, who in the Dead Sea Scrolls is identified as Saint Michael the Archangel. So people might think I'm crazy, but they haven't put 50 years of research into their studies of different religions, where I have. So I know all the different religions. I consider myself a Jain. Now, most people
And
don't
nobody would call them crazy thinking of their religion and, you know, I mean...
This is what I was getting to. We're all programmed by our religion. If you're born from Christian parents, you're likely to be programmed as a Christian. If you're born of Muslim parents, sure enough, you're going to be bowing to Mecca 5 times a day. If you're born as a Hindu, you're going to believe in the triune Hindu God, Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu. And if you're born as a Jew, you're going to believe in a coming Messiah, a king that will save the Jews or the Judah. It's all a matter of programming. You get programmed by the TV, a programmer will program a computer. The computer can't do anything but what the programmer has programmed into its computer. And so, as humans with our brains, we're similar to the, in a computer, what's the center of the computer? What is that called again? Anyway, our brain is like the...
We're getting more comments in saying he said he's the king of not one, but 2 countries.
I haven't been crowned by the Pope. But from what I understand, the Anglo-Saxon king of all the Anglo-Saxons is also the Emperor of Europe. So I've got many crowns, many countries.
And you say you've never pulled rank.
I haven't yet. I'm working.
But then told the cops you're king of all whites.
Yeah, he was asking me to get a psychiatric exam, and I said the rest of you people need psychiatric exams, and you need to kind of study your environment, where you live, and what's going on in your environment. I put 50 years into the study of my environment, both religious and material, and so I know what's going on. I know who the bad characters are in the physical
You know what
environment.
I find ironic?
And I know who the bad characters are in the spiritual environment.
You know what I find ironic?
What's
is that somebody's going to come report you, and the police are going to come and want you to be evaluated, psychiatric evaluation, because of your religious beliefs. When has anybody ever had to do that before? Isn't that a little bit strange that you're going to be evaluated because of your religious beliefs when... What, is everybody with a different religious belief now going to be evaluated?
Like I was saying before, I'm more of a Jain than a Hindu, even though I'm the avatar of Vishnu, which is Hindu god Vishnu, who sees all, and the all-seeing eye is the eye on top of the pyramid, so that's why I consider that the symbol. So anyway, now I'm off track here.
I'm just making the statement that you're
I believe that they're all
evaluated. Okay, you're going to be evaluated
I'm not
because
gonna
of your beliefs. I mean, to me, that seems bizarre. It's your right to believe what you want.
I'll tell you why they're doing it, okay? I believe that many of the Pasco deputies and the Tarpon Police Department are Ku Klux Klan
See, now
members
that's a
in
bold
disguise.
statement right there.
And I told them so. I believe that your sheriff is the head of the Ku Klux Klan.
Okay,
I believe
but
that
that-
your police chief is the head of the Tarpon Ku Klux Klan.
See, now,
I
that's
believe
where
that the
I
city
believe-
manager
hang
is a
on,
Ku
hang
Klux
on.
Klan member because his great-grandfather was a Ku Klux Klan member. It's like Boy Scouts down in Florida is Ku Klux Klan membership. So you can't help but be a good old boy. If you want to be a good old boy, you better join the Ku Klux Klan one way or another.
But see, now that's where you're starting to get a little bit extreme on one side of something, and you're making a statement like that based on nothing of proof or anything like that. So it could be a good reason on why you're getting some of that negative.
But I do have proof. I have satellite photos of the assassination vehicle.
That has nothing to do with officers in Pasco and or Pinellas.
I live
being
next.
KKK members. How,
I
how is
live
that
next door to the head of the Aryan Brotherhood and his wife, who fish with the head of the Pasco Sheriff's Department and his wife. I'm not saying they're for sure Ku Klux Klan. I'm just saying it's a very high likelihood that the buddy-buddy relationship between the head of the Aryan Brotherhood and the head of the Pasco Sheriff's Department would have to be a connection, that they have the same philosophy. And even though there's black people on the Sheriff's Department and black people in the Tarpon Police Department, it still doesn't negate the fact that their original beliefs stem from their fathers, grandfathers, and great-grandfathers' beliefs about the right race being superior. They don't have the archaeological evidence that the white race is superior. But I believe that the white race comes from an angelic hybrid, and the angelic being involved is Saint Michael or Melchizedek, who bred with Sarah to produce Isaac. So the Isaac or the Saxon race is a hybrid. Now, whether or not other races can prove their hybriding one way or another, that's up to the other races. I only am the king of the white race, but I also accept anybody righteous from any race, any religion, or any political faction. In other words, it doesn't matter to me if you're white, black, green, red, or yellow. It doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is what matters to God Almighty, and that is that you're righteous to your fellow man and your creatures that surround you.
That being said, do you think that you're being righteous when you're outright making some outright claims against certain people? Do you think that's being righteous?
Yeah, because if we have John Kennedy's body in the trunk of a limo for 50 years, now it's 51 years.
I'm talking about your
50.
local areas that you're calling people out, saying that are you
Ku-
being righteous?
The head
in
the
your
head of
community?
the Aryan Brotherhood's wife told me they lynch a black boy every 4th of
Now,
July.
come on now.
I was told that. And I expect that the police department and the sheriff's department aren't wearing their police and sheriff department uniforms when they go to those lynchings.
Yeah, that now see, this is where this is
And
a
that's
wild
why-
turn. This is a wild turn, and we got a comment that says this took a wild turn, and that is a wild turn.
And if they want me to take a psychological test, it's only because I'm spreading the truth about them, and they would like to get a psychiatrist to verify that they need to put me away because they don't like the truth spread about the fact that they're embedded in our police departments and sheriff's departments all across the country. And in fact, what's his name, Byrd of the Senate, was a mentor to Clinton, Hillary Clinton. So, and the Democratic Party has been the party of the Ku Klux Klan all along, but now it's infused itself into both parties. Well, it doesn't seem fair to the rest of the people if we have an organized group that's out for themselves. This is America. We should be out for everybody. And John Kennedy, who was a white person, made a big effort in bringing any other color besides white into the same rights as the white man. He said, how can we all be free if 10% of us are not given the same rights? So John Kennedy was a great man. Even though he was white, he was accepting all the people. And I feel that that's what I'm doing too. And the Ku Klux Klan is a great embarrassment to someone who might be king of the white race.
Those are bold statements. And so, as bold as they are, that's where I'm believing you're getting some of this backlash, because somebody could just say this is all speculation stuff, nothing of proof, but aside from hearsay.
Well, you've seen the stone anchors, you've seen Noah's
The
stone
anchors and this are two different things, and they're two different animals as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I mean, I'm a good psychic archaeologist. I've also
and I see the anchors, and I know you've had people from California come here, and they've collaborated with you, and they've confirmed and shared opinions on these anchors.
What they did is, I had a guy come from California with the newspapers. He did his master's thesis on Atlantis. He'd worked with the Edgar Cayce Foundation. He went out into the Bahamas with Bimini Island with Greg Little and Greg Little's wife, and they all thought they saw pyramids or a walkway of Atlantis out there.
I know the story
in
well.
the Atlantic Ocean. And then I brought, what the heck is his name? I brought the archaeologist over to my stone anchors. He goes, these are the biggest stone anchors I've ever seen. And I showed him anchor after anchor after anchor with the news crew following us. And he still said, well, I think Atlantis is out in the ocean. So he didn't help me a bit. Nobody's helped me on this project. I could have been way ahead if I can't think of his name, but the archaeologist from Buena Vista, California. I'll think of it in a minute. But anyway, he actually screwed me by saying, John's wrong, Atlantis is in the ocean where we found nothing. And he's found thousands of stone anchors, and he's the wrong guy, and we're right. I don't get that part. I found 500,000 tons of anchors, and nobody else has found 1 ounce of Atlantis. So you can imagine how they get jealous. We have 2,000 archaeologists in the state that all they can look up is arrowheads, spearheads, and pottery shards. They're embarrassed.
We did have another comment of somebody saying, I can get an expert to call in and tell the other side of the story.
We'll have him on next week. Fairness in that expert. I don't think how he can compete against me. I mean, I got 50 years of research. I'm probably the longest researched archaeologist of sound mind still present on the earth. I mean, I've got 50 years in archaeology. I've read book after book. I'm of the bloodline, I believe, of the Judaic bloodline, father to son till the end of time. That's what Jacob said in the Bible. He said to Judah, you'll hold the scepter, father to son till the end of time. I've traced my line back to Judah.
So, are you saying essentially you're challenging somebody
Anybody.
to challenge you?
Yes.
On the next show? Next week, you're looking for somebody on the next show, 8:30 next Wednesday. You're challenging somebody to contest any and all of what you're saying. Is that correct?
Yes, but I would also like to challenge the people to talk to their friends on Facebook and YouTube and any friends or associates they have to look at the review of this particular show and get ready for next week's show. Because
what's next week's show?
Well, you said we get if they
We
can-
could have people call in and contest this. As a matter of fact, we can have professionals
Right.
who call themselves professionals or
find a
whatever it may be.
professional, find a priest out there, find a bishop, find a cardinal, anybody that thinks they can contest what I'm saying. I've been calling bishops and archbishops and cardinals and telling them I want to get the Pope to crown me emperor in Europe so that people will listen to me. And I will be the new Holy Roman Emperor because I have the bloodline that matches that issue. And I also have the intelligence and the background that I know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of evil people out there. And if you get one emperor that's a righteous emperor, I'm not doing it for money or fame. I mean,
How well versed do you believe you are in each religion?
the best in the world
Are you? That's a bold claim.
on all the religions.
On all religions,
yes.
you're the best in the world.
Yes, because they're all talking about prophecy. They're all talking about the great day of the Lord, the culling of mankind. All religions are based on the prophecy of the end times and the end of mankind. What I'm trying to do is save as many people from an earth flip as possible. That's not like Jesus Christ saving people, but it's just me trying to tell people we've got a astrophysical problem coming, and if you want to be safe, you'll either get a submarine, a ark, or build a bunker somewhere just in case, and be close to that ark, submarine, or bunker, because on dry land you're not going to survive.
So let's wrap this up towards next week's show.
Sure.
Next week, next Wednesday, 8:30.
I
Essentially,
challenge anybody.
You're challenging anybody, and
Anybody on the
specifically in
And-
all religions.
And I'm also
Specific.
challenging any Ku Klux Klan members that want to try to say how good they are, because all I see is they're beating their wives, they're infiltrating the police forces, they're
I gotta
causing.
be honest with you, I wouldn't know anything about that because I've never seen one, or I've never even heard.
They
this
traded
topic.
in their robes for the authoritarianism of having a gun and the police force behind them, and their buddies are all for them, and you can even have them go out and murder somebody, and they'll pretend like it was the other guy's fault.
Okay.
So
I don't want to go down that
I see-
rabbit hole
I see it
because you
live.
seem to have a lot better literature and studies with you that you bring with you with a lot of the religious stuff that you're talking about. But that's something, a total different animal, and I'm not.
I'd like to finish this off with where Satan is and who he is, okay?
Okay.
Satan's just like Michael the Archangel. They're just two spaceship captains, okay? Michael, or Melchizedek, or Spaceship Captain Michael, shoots down Spaceship Captain Lucifer. His spaceship hits in the center of the Saudi Arabian Peninsula. So yes, that's a picture of him behind me, and so he needs to get back to his city on Earth, and it's 1,000 miles away from where his spaceship crashes. So he goes back to Petra, and he influences people like Abraham and different people of the Bible. You know, this is Lucifer. He's the king of the earth. If you or I landed on a island and there was just a bunch of primitive people on the island, and we still had the gear out of our boat, and we even had a communication device so we could talk to our home base where our boat came from, and told them that we'll be getting supplies besides the stuff that we got on our boat, everybody would make me king of the island. That's what Satan's position is here on Earth. He's an alien with a whole bunch of technology. His spaceship crashed, and there's one thing that those spaceships are able to do that the rest of us can't do, and that's travel in time. So the spaceship can't fly, but the time machine part of the spaceship is still working where he crashed. So why did they move Mecca to the middle of Saudi Arabia where there is nothing and no signs of where Muhammad lived? Why did they move it to the middle of the Saudi Arabian Peninsula? Not on a trade route, but in the middle of the sand with nothing around
Why?
it. They moved it there because Satan's spaceship, Lucifer's spaceship, crashed in the Saudi Arabian desert, and it's under about 6 feet to 8 feet of sand. The top of the ship is. It doesn't work as a spaceship anymore, but it works as a time machine. And Lucifer, or Satan, has been using that time machine to confound mankind ever since he crashed here. I don't know how many years ago, probably 12,000 years ago. So it's taken me 50 years to figure out who he is, where he is, and how he can do what he's doing. So every time we have a conflict in mankind's humanity, he's seen what will happen if he doesn't go back in time and influence that. So that's how he's king of the earth. Just as if we were on a desert island, we radioed in a bombing raid on a bunch of primitives that didn't believe in me on the island. They'd think I was pretty special. And that's basically what Satan's been doing. He's influenced people like Napoleon, Caesar, and he walks in just as a large human. And before they know it, they're under his spell.
All right, let's take from here. We'll transition into the next week's program, Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. Little preview. Give us a little preview of what we're going to be doing next week.
I'd like to have people contact their friends, show them this show, and call in with questions. And I'll answer them to the best of my ability. And if they have a challenge on one issue or another, I'll bring in a few books and I can point you right to the spot.
And what about people that call
I'm
themselves
not even making
professionals?
all this stuff up. It's taken me 50 years of research to figure this out. There's no delusion of grandeur here. There's just a lot of hard work.
I'm looking forward to it. And we can get maybe some popes. Who else could call up?
Popes?
Yeah, who could call up the show?
Well, I hope we get priests. I hope we get rabbis. I hope we get mullahs and, people from different religions that are based in their religion.
And you call yourself an expert,
I'm
more
an
knowledgeable than anybody in
Anybody
all
on Earth.
religions. Anybody
Yeah,
on this
and it's
earth.
all through archaeology. It's not through the study of each of the religions. It's through the viewing the artifacts that have been left on the earth, and that's the way I've been able to arrange truth, is by studying these artifacts. One artifact I have is a pistol that killed Bobby Kennedy. That pistol shows me that the Ku Klux Klan was behind not only the assassination of John Kennedy and Martin Luther King, but it was also behind the assassination of Bobby Kennedy because Mr. Caesar, who was a security guard, came up behind Bobby Kennedy and shot him 3 times with a 5-shot gun. He shot all 5 shots, but he shot him 3 times in the head and armpit and shoulder, but the one in his head killed him. So I see an evil force on earth, whether you call it Nazism, whether you call it white supremacists, these are people with these are the egomaniacs, because they think because they were born white that they can rule the earth, and so they're making plans to rule the earth, and they'll let token blacks and Chinese and Japanese in on the game, but they're only token. It's a white man's game on the earth, and basically it's all based on greed. It's greed for the mansions, and when the earth flips, they'll have their bunkers underneath the ground, and they'll just come up after the earth flips and the waters recede again, and they'll own the earth, and there'll be very few of us left.
So for next week, next Wednesday at 8:30 p.m., you're claiming to be the most knowledgeable in all religions,
Easily.
more than anybody on this planet Earth.
Yeah,
more knowledge.
Because the archaeology has deprogrammed me. I was believing the same thing they were.
Well, in closing, invite everybody for next week, and we'll
Yeah,
end
definitely.
the show, and we'll get back to it
Definitely,
next week.
folks. I would like to answer any questions you might have, both spiritual and material. I'll answer them the best I can, and I hope you all do share this with your friends. Thanks for watching. And thank you, Lipa Productions and Johnny Lyons, for producing this. I really appreciate the opportunity to get out here and do this. Who is that?
It's our
My double?
pleasure. Guys, you heard it, okay? If you have anything that you want to challenge him on, next Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. is your chance to do that. And I know we've got a lot of different shows that are coming up and things. This has been one we've kind of been iffy about on several times, but you cannot deny the fact he's got a load of information. He's definitely put in some hard time, and you can hear he's educated in many religions. So that's your chance to challenge him on that next Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. And Mr. Saxer, we look forward to that.
And I do too. I'll see you all next Wednesday, 8:30. Thank you for watching.
From Leap Alive, we will see you guys next Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. Peace out, my friends. Peace out.